Hi everyone, and thanks for being with me on my final live chat for 2025. Now, again, as is often the case, it's not coming up on my channel, on my YouTube channel for varying reasons, but I guess it tells me that it's an excellent feed, and I guess you're getting the video anyway. And I'm sure some of you will tell me if you're not. So let me know what is the case here. Now, I'm going to talk about lots of things today, but primarily I'm going to talk about whether or not we should in Australia hold a royal commission into the Bondi massacre. And I know that many of you will be wondering as to whether or not we should or we shouldn't, and trying to make up your mind as to which direction we should take. So I've got a survey, a poll that I've asked you to fill out in relation to all of this. So please do so we can keep track of what you think about whether a royal commission should be held or not. Now, I've got a number of things we'll be talking about in relation to this. And to be fair, I'm going to have a conversation about a number of articles that have come out in relation to the Royal Commission. The first article would be "You Owe Us Answers. Families of Bondi Victims Demand PM Launch Federal Royal Commission." So that would be one article. "The Bondi Shooters Not Part of a Terror Attack" will be the other. "Why Albanese is Plain Wrong on a Bondi Royal Commission" from the Sydney Morning Herald will also be another. And there are three kinds of anti-Semitism it needs to be dealt with differently is another. And then I'll be having a quick look at an article which is "It's Frightening How Far Right is Infiltrating Everyday Culture." And I'll be finishing with some statement about the fact that we often forget about partners of violent men who are attacked and who are murdered, and that in Australia we have around between 85 and 95 women killed at the hands of their partners. And I'm going to raise that as an issue because it's important for us to understand that even though horrific it was at the Bondi attack, it was evident, it is evident to me that we need to consider other areas where people are acting badly, which tends to be pushed into the background and seems to be ignored. So I'll be talking about that at the end of my session today as well. So, number of people online, I really do appreciate it. And if you could please subscribe to my YouTube channel, ring the bell for further notifications, do what you need to do. And also, there's an opportunity just to send me a cup of coffee by sending some dough. If you can do that as well, I really would appreciate it. It's all part of the process. I just want to start, though, with this idea about the Royal Commission, whether or not we should have a Royal Commission. And someone says, hi, don't know who you are, Killerman. Thank you very much for coming on board. Please let us know who you are, where you're from, if you wouldn't mind, so that I get a sense as to what is the demographic that we're speaking to in terms of which country you come from and where you might rest in Australia. And also, I don't expect to get all that many people on board today. After all, it is 2 days till the end of the year. But as I said, this is my final one for this year, but I will be doing one on Thursday as well as the first of 2026. And it will be an important one too, because it'll be about trying to capture everything that happened in 2025 and try to understand where we're likely to go in this coming year. My suspicion is that 2026 is going to be a mess. I'm not suggesting for a moment that there'll be another incident like the Bondi attack, but I am suggesting that politically we are finding ourselves in a quagmire of hate, disrespect, fear, and resentment, which is something that has been compounded by the Liberal Party and the Nationals and One Nation since December the 14th, and prior to that too, I hasten to add. But the flow of information, which has been vitriolic and unhelpful, has been overpowering, I think, at a time when we should be coming together, working together to resolve the problems, not try and create further disharmony and disinformation as well. And so I am keen to find ways by which we can move through all of this and make a difference. Now, my view, my personal view, is that with regard to the Royal Commission, is that, you know, we've had Royal Commissions before. There's a few things we know about them. Number one is they cost a lot of money. Number two, the people that make the most out of a Royal Commission are the lawyers. The legal fraternity love them. They make millions of dollars from them. Do they provide the answers that we want? Not necessarily. Do they look at every minuscule, every small detail? Yes, they do. In fact, what has been requested from the Liberal Party is a document which outlines 72 areas that should be covered by a Royal Commission. From what happened at Bondi, who knew what, and what they did know, and whether they could have prevented these two lunatics from doing what they did or not, down to, you know, how we should control our education system so that in universities people are not being taught to become radicalised, so to speak. Don't think they are, but, you know, and there are other elements here about how this will actually impact our freedom of speech, and we're seeing some inroads being made to curtailing what we should be saying and how we should be saying it, because whatever we say and whatever I say, whatever other people on YouTube say or elsewhere or on X, may be deemed as hate speech. So, you know, one of my issues primarily is if we criticise Israel for what they're doing to Gaza and the genocide that they've created, and that they are a fascist state, and that they are an apartheid state, then we should call them out for what they are, and whether or not that verges on to hate speech. You know, it does interest me, and someone raised this with me the other day. Why is it that we can criticise the United States as much as we can and nothing happens, but when we criticise Israel and the IDF, then all hell breaks loose? And why is it that we're inviting the president of Israel to Australia when he himself is a right-wing lunatic? I do not understand all of that. And when is our government ever going to make a stand against Israel and the things that they do? Don't know about that either, but it's about time we did. You know, just the simple fact that we recognise Palestine and we want a two-state solution is not good enough. We should understand that what happens in Israel and what happens in Gaza is horrible and is a genocidal behaviour. So how are we going to work? And does the Royal Commission discuss all of that? At the end of the day, and I think Robodebt's a good indication of this, Robodebt ran for ages. It produced nothing, really. And there were 7 aspects of the final inquiry, the final report, that actually stated that that was to be held in camera, that we were not to know what it was that was in those 7 last elements. Now, those last elements also included the people that needed to be prosecuted in relation to that, including perhaps Scott Morrison and the people that ran the department, but nothing ever happened. So we know that at the end of Royal Commission, millions of dollars being spent, lots of money being poured into it from all over the place, people of all varying dimensions dragged in front of the Royal Commission, only to find that nothing at the end of the day comes of it. And the other thing that I think is really important to understand here is that the people who hold anti-Semitic views, they are the ones that could use the Royal Commission as a platform to advocate for their views. And I think that that is fraught with danger and should never be allowed. So a Royal Commission will in and of itself be a platform for these people to talk about their own version of hate in an environment which will listen to them and will broadcast what they have to say to the rest of the world. I think it's wrong. Let me know what you think. I think we should do something about it by doing something which the government is doing. And I'm supporting what the government's doing in terms of, and I see people are ringing up the poll. Thank you very much. 86% at this point say no. But if you say yes, you want a Royal Commission, please have a conversation with me about what that Royal Commission should look like if you want to have one. And remember, they're having a Royal Commission in New South Wales anyway. As I understand it, the federal government is allowing their Royal Commission to access the ASIO and the federal police in order to find out what their roles were as well. So maybe that Royal Commission will come up with the information that is required. And following from all of that, maybe if the Royal Commission didn't come up with what was required after years and years of investigation, then perhaps a Royal Commission federally might be in order. We do not know what will happen. But the primary point here that I want to make is that people who were harmed by this in the Jewish community, I believe, want to know what happened, why it happened, and whether it could have been prevented. That is the key. Now, are they prepared to wait 2 years to get a solution to that? Is there expectation that as the Royal Commission unfolds, little nuggets of information will be provided which will provide them with some answers? Who knows? I don't know. They don't know. But at the end of the day, a final report is a long way off. And I'm not convinced that those people want to wait that long. So the Richardson inquiry, as proposed by Albanese, will provide some answers to those questions come April of next year. Let's wait. Let's be patient. Let's see what eventuates from that investigation. And I think that that investigation, which is basically about finding out all we need to know about ASIO's role, what ASIO knew, whether in fact this behaviour of these two crazy people could have been prevented in the first place, is a question that we need to be asking each other. And we need to have that resolved. And I think that's the fundamental question that wants to be resolved. Is the other question that we want to resolve is how to combat anti-Semitism. Now, to better understand that, I think we need to consider that anti-Semitism has been in the air for centuries. It is not a new phenomenon. So would an inquiry or a Royal Commission investigate whether or not October the 7th, 2023 meant that from that moment on, the anti-Semitism in this country increased? My understanding is, I can't present the data to you right now, but my understanding is that that was the trigger point. That the moment Israel chose to respond in the way they did to October the 7th, then anti-Semitism increased. It was fueled on the back. Anti-Semitism, let's understand this, anti-Semitism was there to start with. It didn't start on October the 7th. But it gave those people who were anti-Semitic an opportunity to raise some concerns and to voice their anti-Semitism behaviour in terms of the way they approached the Jewish community and the things that these terrible people have done to childcare centres and to synagogues and whatever. We understand all of that, and it's wrong. No dispute around that. But what we need to understand is that there are many people, such as myself, who object to what happened on following October the 7th, October the 8th to the 9th, and how the IDF and the Israel government have chosen to adopt. They didn't choose at that time, they chose a long time before this, but they certainly have chosen to emphasise their apartheid approach to Palestinians. And this is the key issue that we need to start to understand, and we need to start to manage in some form or another. Now, this brings me to these two dudes. So before I get there, I'll bring up this article, which is titled "You Owe Us Answers: Family of Bondi Victims Demand PM Launch Federal Royal Commission." Now, I'm quite sympathetic to why they want this to happen. There is a belief, I think, that somehow a Royal Commission is going to delve deeper into these issues than what an inquiry will do. And maybe there's some truth in that. I mean, the Liberal Party have come up with a 72-point thing which covers everything you could possibly ever imagine needs to be investigated. So I appreciate that, and I'm not discounting it. But in this article, it says, grieving families of Jewish victims of the Bondi shooting have urged Prime Minister Anthony Albanese to hold a Commonwealth Royal Commission into the rise of anti-Semitism and other failures that contribute to Australia's worst mass killing in decades, declaring the federal government declaring the federal government has done not nearly enough since the incident that left 15 innocent people dead and dozens injured, 70 families connected to most of those killed on December the 14th, said in a statement they wanted a royal commission to examine the rapid rise in anti-Semitism after the Hamas attack of October 7, 2023, as well as failing in law enforcement, intelligence and policy. Now, I can tell you, as a mere social worker, and someone who at least tries to understand the nuances of what happened, is that, as I said, anti-Semitism was simmering. Anti-Semitism is a horrible, horrible indictment on racist, on prejudice, and a whole host of other things. And that what the IDF did gave license to people to act badly. That's what it did. On the other hand, attacking the IDF and Netanyahu and the Israeli government has given many of us a license to say that what they're doing is wrong. It's as simple as that. And there are two different things here. There's the issue around, bombing and destroying places of worship for the Jewish people. Also, it's not only their synagogues but schools and other places, and to attack them is wrong. No disputing any of that. But what we need to understand is that the conflation of the two issues, what Israel are doing by trying to eliminate Palestinians from the region, is definitely wrong and is a criminal act and is breaking international law. We need to understand that to start with. That is not anti-Semitism. That is anti-genocide. That is about a group of people around the world, not just me, but other people, who understand that the attempt to eliminate a certain group of people based on their heritage or their religion is wrong. It's as simple as that, and we don't need to actually focus much on that to be able to understand that what I am saying, in my view, is the key issue here, but it is not anti-Semitic. And there has to come a time when we have to face our governments, or encourage our governments to make a stand against all of this as well. Now, the other thing that I want to talk about, got to grab a drink, is whether or not, when we found out about these, when the shooting happened, a lot of people jumped to a variety of conclusions. The primary conclusion was that these two horrible individuals were members of ISIS, and that there was a cell of ISIS terrorists sitting out there in the community waiting to commit further atrocities, that they didn't act alone, and that they went to the Philippines to receive some form. This is a story I heard, and it was widely reported, that they went to the Philippines to go to some sort of terrorist training camp. Now, that has been refuted by the AFP. So I just wanted to bring you this article, though, where the Bondi shooters, not part of a terrorist cell, acting alone, says the AFP chief. Bondi shooters, Naveed and Sajid Akram, acted alone and were not part of a broader terrorist cell. I think we need to acknowledge that, and we need to understand that they were not part of a broader terrorist cell. Let's bury that idea. She said, providing a limited public update as the surviving shooter faces dozens of criminal charges. Offering additional information emerging from a joint investigation with the Philippine National Police, Barrett said it was their assessment that there was no evidence to suggest these alleged offenders were part of a broader terrorist cell or were directed by others to carry out an attack. Barrett said the father and son shooters did not receive any training or logistical preparation during their month in the Philippines shortly before December the 14th attack, but cautioned this did not mean they were in the country for tourism. The issue being that the AFP, or no one really knows why it is these people were there. So it goes on to say the pair were in the Philippines for almost a month, with local police assessing the pair rarely left their hotel. Salad Akram was shot dead by police at the site of attack, while his son Naveed is facing 59 charges. I want to underscore that the update I give today is our initial assessment. It's a point in time the AFP and our partners still have significant investigation work to undertake, and it is possible that new information or evidence may be forthcoming as a part of that, Barrett said. And I think we need to understand, rather than getting all our knickers in a knot over all of this, we need to be mindful of the fact that the information that's come to us at the moment through the AFP, who are in working relationships with the Philippine police, know that the reality is that these people were not part of an ISIS cell, or that they didn't travel to the Philippines in order to receive some sort of terrorist training. Now that's important, because we need to note that the first point of call for the media and for others was to assert that these people were part of an ISIS cell and that there was likely to be further attacks. That is false and has been proven to be so. And there must be some lessons that I guess we all could learn from ensuring that we don't adapt to those sorts of, propaganda, one could say. Now, there's also another article which, just to give some balance so that we could understand that we're kind of all on the same page. So I will explore this one in just a moment. Someone also, I just want to thank Kilabanato for paying us some money. I really appreciate that. I can't tell you how much. That's a great deal of meaning to me. So thank you very much for that. And someone's also apparently turned the side. I've got someone monitoring this so I can understand exactly what's going on, because I'm talking into the camera, and I've got in front of me another screen. I've got 1, 2, 3. I've got 4 screens happening here, and one of the screen in front of me has got all your statements, all your comments coming up, and I can't do 1,000 things at once. There's only me, so I have to look at this. So I've got someone trying to monitor what other people are saying. Someone's saying if they're from the Middle East, most likely they'll be Arabs. I don't know what you're talking about. They aren't defending themselves, though. They are conducting genocide against another group. But yeah, absolutely. So I'll carry on with, and I'll try and get back. I'll try and get back to some of the statements. So I just want to get distracted, which is not good. Not good when you're doing a live feed. So there's this other article, though, which is why Albanese is playing wrong on Bondi Royal Commission. So I'm trying to be as broad as I can to give us all an opinion. We're down to 75% now on the. So please, please contribute to what do you think about a Royal Commission or not. Anthony Albanese's opposition to a National Royal Commission into the massacre at Bondi, quite simply, baffling, says this article. As the shock and indignation of the first days after the attack have given way to grief, rage and partisan politics, the Prime Minister has dug in his heels over and over again, insisting a federal inquiry is not needed. Albanese has offered justification that a national inquiry would slow down the learning of lessons from the attack. That is the point I agree with. That New South Wales was holding one anyway. That one was not held either after the Port Arthur massacre or the Lind Cafe siege, and that former senior public servant Dennis Richardson has to trust the security agencies, so we'll be able to undertake a quick review. And actually, I do agree with the notion that there wasn't one after Port Arthur, because that was just a lone attack of a little crazy man. So we know all about that. Those of us that lived through that understand that. And the Lind Cafe bloke was also another crazy man. One was a white man who lived in Tasmania, and the other one was of some Arab descent, I think. People can tell me about that. But so neither of those had a royal commission, and that was rightfully so. This all sounds quite reasonable until you remember that Port Arthur in particular was the lone wolf attack. Yep, got all that. I've said that, and Bondi did, because of a potentially glaring intelligence failure by security agencies, which they would dispute and which needs to be settled by an impartial third party. Third party could be the Richardson inquiry, but nevertheless, a state-based commission could be hamstring in its ability to call some federal witnesses, even though the Labor Party the government has stated that that isn't necessarily the case, that they will give permission. And we will know where they're not giving permission to interview ASIO staff and others in relation to that. It also lacked the scope to examine the rise of anti-Semitism across the nation, with the forebombing of a rabbi's car in Melbourne in the early hours of Christmas morning. Another reminder, this isn't just a Sydney problem. Yes, the coalition. So, and I guess that's a reasonable argument. So, and it isn't just a Sydney problem. And I guess this is what I find rather befuddling, is anti-Semitism, as I've said before, is on the rise, primarily because it's always been there, just like racism in Australia. It's always there. It just takes something to bring it to the surface, such as the referendum on Indigenous people 2 years ago. That brought racism to the surface, right? October the 7th and what followed brought that to the surface as well. So it is important, I think, for us to understand, all of us, the circumstances and the nuances that have brought about the catalysing of anti-Semitism. And I don't think you need to be a rocket scientist or whatever to understand that. I guess what we need to understand, and tell me if I'm wrong here, folks, but what we need to understand is what breeds it. So let's just assume for a moment that it is always there. It sits in the community, it's always prevalent, and that somehow we need to ensure that that even though it's there, we need to somehow understand the degree to which it is simmering, and as you know, and that people become radicalized through social media, and that there are people. No one's going to dispute that. There are people who say the most atrocious things about Palestinian people. We know that because the IDF do, the government does in Israel. They say terrible things. But we also know that there are some imams and others and spiritual leaders, so-called, who say terrible things about Jewish people. And if you do say something terrible about a Jewish person, you should be prosecuted. No dispute that. Don't disagree with that. I think you can say terrible things, though, if you like, about Netanyahu and the Israeli government, because they are terrible. It's as simple as that. But we can't and we should not ever target a religious group, whether it be Jewish, Christian, Islamic, whatever it might be. We should never, ever do that. We should try and understand their particular beliefs and why they believe what they do. And we certainly should never, ever say that because a person is of Islamic faith, that they are advocating for some sort of violent ideology. That is just not true, and that is not false. I could argue many occasions where white nationalists who say they're Christians, or neo-Nazis who say that they're Christians, have terrible beliefs, a belief system in relation to coloured people and people of different faiths. We could argue that right across the board. What we need to find the space to argue, though, is how do we combat those people who want to propagate ideology that is designed to harm another group of people. And if someone does do that, is that inhibiting their freedom of speech? Is that us at some level saying that you cannot say those things because they are wrong, or that they are creating a sense of fear in another group? Or is it only when they're provoking or proposing violence that we should then say that is crossing the line? At what point? Where is this line? Where is this line? And the government is trying to find a way by which they can stipulate that line, and it's fraught with danger, because at the end of the day, it will restrict what many of us think is our freedom to say whatever we need to say about another group of people with whom we disagree. And that is a core problem, I believe. So it goes on to say in this article, yes, the coalition is using calls for a Royal Commission as a wedge to damage the federal Labor government. And ain't that the truth? In fact, here we go. In fact, I was going to talk in a really soft voice, like I'm just talking to a few of you. But the reality is, I think, that the way the coalition have chosen to attack the Labor Party, rather than working collaboratively with them to solve some of these problems, indicates the division that they are prepared to provide. That they're not working with the government to solve the problem, they're working against the government because they see a political opportunity here to score some points. And I think that the Australian people are much smarter than all of that. That Australians will be able to see through what the coalition is planning to do, and will start to realise that all they're doing is shouting, screaming and crying about something for which they do not themselves have a solution. We also need to remember that when it comes to these two dudes who did this terrible thing on December the 14th, we must understand that the reasons why they were in a position to do what they did was because the Liberal Party who were in power allowed them to do so. They allowed them to come to Australia, they allowed them to get the citizenship, they allowed them to get the guns. That was the Liberal Party. That wasn't the Labor Party. So when we have an inquiry, and I don't think that they've thought about this one iota, but does that mean also any inquiry is going to highlight the failings of the Morrison government? Probably so. But that's not the point you need to win right now. What you need to win is the angry vote. So those people that can't see the forest for the trees, they're the ones that are going to say, yes, we now have the Labor Party over the barrel. And what is so impressive, the thing that impresses me the most about Albanese, and he's done many things I don't agree with, but the thing that impresses me the most is that he's not buying into their shit. He has decided that I'm not going to fight back as they're fighting back to me. In fact, today he was asked a question in a press conference in relation to all of this, and all he did was highlight the dates that these people got their citizenship, entered Australia, got their visas, whatever it was, got their guns. He just mentioned those dates. He didn't say, well, the Liberal Party were responsible for all of that. He didn't need to. It was obvious to everybody. But he decided not to attack them. Citing the dates was enough. A good strategy, and something that I think we need to focus on in terms of the way Albanese is approaching this. So what else do they say in this article? Further, with former high school Chief Justice Robert French, former head of the Australian Secret Intelligence Service Dick Warner, current and former Labor MPs including Mike Freeland, Ed Husak, Mike Kelly, Nova Peris and former Premier Peter Beattie, and country independent Helen Haynes are among those people calling for a federal inquiry. It is safe to say this is not only a partisan push. And they're right. It isn't just a partisan push. There are people that hold different views right across the spectrum about this. And somehow, amongst all of that shit, we have to make up our mind as to who we're going to support. Well, I've made up my mind. I'm supporting an inquiry. Let's see what happens. It brings about the results a little bit sooner than what it would be, a lot sooner, in fact, than had it been a Royal Commission. Let's see what unfolds. Let's see what happens. If there are further questions beyond that, then fair enough. Let's ask them. If it doesn't cover areas that needed to be covered, fine. But let's hope it doesn't go down the path of questioning whether what universities should be doing or saying that will affect their funding, and their research. And so there was one case the other day, I haven't got the details on it, but I read an article where some woman who was definitely anti-Israel, she lost her funding and it was reinstated at a later date from a university. Universities need to be independent. They make up their own minds about all of this and how this works. That's the important thing about universities, not to be controlled by governments just because governments provide some of the funding. So we need to be mindful of that as well. Now, there is this other interesting article I'm going to bring you to at the moment. So I don't know how your discussions are going. I put an inquiry or differential between these groups. They all belong to the same bin. It's certainly a better place when the majority believed it. So obviously people are having a whole host of discussions around this. So go for it. Let me know what you're going. So the goal now says 98%. So please put in your penny's worth there, and please remember to send me a cup of coffee by sending a donation, which I greatly appreciated. And I just want to thank the person that sent me $8. I think that's fantastic, and I really do appreciate it as well. So, okay, moving on. There are three kinds of anti-Semitism. Each needs to be dealt with differently. So, I'll talk about that in just a second. I'm just trying to find where my friend's sending me that stuff. So someone's saying apparently, bang on about Islam. Islam's all bad. All right, so I don't know who that person is because I haven't had a chance to look. I'll just make a comment about Islam. Number one, I don't know all that much about Islam. I grew up as a Christian, so I guess I know a lot about the Christian faith. And I know a splattering about others and probably know less about the Jewish faith. But let me say this. In all religions, in all faiths, there are extremists. There are people who believe that theirs is the only religion and that any other religion is a pathway to hell. And I think anybody who believes that is simply wrong. That there is no specific enlightenment that tells us that one is better than another. A belief is just a belief. And for that reason, I'm an atheist. So I'm actually amongst a group of people that are dominating our population at the moment. And the Christian faith, I think, has dropped in Australia down to about 48%. So it's not even a majority anymore. The Muslim faith is at about 44%, and the Jewish faith is about 0.4%. So the Muslims and the Islams, whoever you might be, who's objecting to all of that, have got a greater population in Australia than does the Jewish faith. And so, what does all of that mean? Doesn't matter, right? There are good people who are Islams. There are good people who are Christians. There are also shitty people who might support radical Islam, and there are also shitty people who probably support white nationalism and the white replacement theory. So there are crappy people all over the place. What we need to do is find a way to confront that crappiness and decide to make decisions about whether we listen to it or whether we do what I try to do through my channel, is to call it out for what it is, which is simply untrue. It's untrue that we cannot label all people as being homogenous just because one person has chosen to act badly. So because these people on December the 14th behaved so badly and that they were part of ISIS, we can't say that all people who are of the Islamic faith are ISIS sympathizers. They are not. It's as simple as that. You don't have to be a genius to understand that concept. It is simply a fact. There's a Imam who's called the Imam of Peace, and he lectures about peace and what his teachings tell him about peace in this world. And it is not about an intifada for Islamic people. One other thing that disturbs me is the way the interpretation of some of the language is presented. From the river to the sea is really about, for a lot of people, is really about living peacefully in that particular region of the Middle East. About Israelis living peacefully with Palestinians. They've done it before, and if it wasn't for the Netanyahu government and the indoctrination of young people in Israel, they probably could. But because of that, they probably can't. So I'll bring you to this article, which is there are 3 kinds of anti-Semitism. Each needs to deal with differently. Each day that passes since the imaginable terror of the events of Bondi seems to bring with it fresh announcements from various levels of government. The understandable rage felt within the Jewish community that they have been let down by police, the intelligence agencies, and even the Prime Minister himself, combined with the inevitable reality that opposition parties would smell political advantage. And boy, have they ever done that. Albanese, who had floundered at first, clearly sensed that political winds had begun to shift against him. Thoughts, prayers, crappy ship, and wishy-washy statements about Australian values would no longer cut it if they ever had. So after a pause, we now have a raft of new federal measures designed to crack down on anti-Semitism, incorporating everything from gun reform to new vilification and hate speech offences. These can be added to those already tabled in the New South Wales Parliament by the swifter acting Premier Chris Minns, not to be outdone by a 5-point plan announced on Monday by Victorian Premier Jacinda Allen. In the mix, too, is the 20-page report by anti-Semitism envoy Gillian Siegel, which contains 30 recommendations and 49 key actions. And just on Gillian Siegel, do need to point out her ties to Israel and and Zionism. There is a fear that governments are scrambling to propose solutions without properly evaluating the problem. If this is the case, there's a real risk of knee-jerk overreaction, and this is my concern, particularly when it comes to containing important civil liberties, including freedom of speech and assembly. And this is the part that I think we all need to be focused on, because this is where we're going. That's a really unhealthy place to be. I just want to thank the other person who's contributed to my coffees. Thank you very much for that. I appreciate it greatly. As the situation stands, there appears to be no singular monolithic anti-Semitism festering in Australia, but rather multiple different mutations of this ancient virus. And how good is that? As the situation stands, there appears to be no singular monolithic anti-Semitism festering in Australia, but rather multiple different mutations of this ancient virus. The 2 most outwardly and unashamedly anti-Semitic groups are the Islamic extremists and the far-right neo-Nazis. They are similar in that they exist on the fringe of society and are actively engaged in recruiting for their cause. Both largely target disaffected young men, and both use online space to spread their hateful ideologies as well as connect with and import ideas from like-minded groups overseas. We should, however, avoid lumping them together when crafting our response. And they go on to say much more. It's a really worthwhile article. Please read it. And I also wanted to talk about, because that leads us to that last bit in that article, leads us to this notion that we're shifting further and further to the right. And, you know, I mean, we need to work out, you know, what does it mean when we say we're shifting further and further to the right? Where are we going with that? Does that mean as we shift further to the right, we're more anti-Semitic? I think it does. Does it mean that we're going to disadvantage the poorest people in our community, the most vulnerable people in our community? Yes, it does. Who's it giving power to? Over and above all, it gives power to the wealthy and those people who control the system that controls the rest of us. That is the point. And so there's this article, which I'll just read briefly to you, won't bore you too long. It's frightening how far right is infiltrating everyday culture. Extremist messages now woven into music and YouTube videos, with one expert saying you can be radicalized sitting on your couch. And this, I think, primarily talks about the challenge in relation to how we're going to deal with anti-Semitism in our community and how we deal with radicalization in particular. The two men chop peppers, slice aubergines and giggle into the camera as they delve into the art of vegan cooking. Both are wearing ski masks, and T-shirts bearing Nazi symbols. The German video, titled Balaclava Kitchen, started in 2014 and ran for months before YouTube took down the channel for violating its guidelines. But, and this is the point, it offered a glimpse of how far-right groups have seized on cultural production, from clothing brands to top 40 music, to normalise their ideas in a process the researchers say has hit new heights in the age of social media. It's frightening, honestly, said Catherine Konda, a researcher with the Norwegian Centre of Holocaust and Minority Studies. You can be radicalised sitting on your couch. How we deal with that in Australia is the really important question. In affiliation with the Centre for Research on Extremism, Condor is leading a 6-country project looking at how the extreme right uses aesthetics, from fitness influencers to memes and stickers, to spread their view across Europe. From Sweden to Spain, researchers found that extremist messages was woven through cultural aspects of everyday life, both online and offline. In Hungary, we have some examples of extreme right bands becoming mainstream because they're on the top 40 chart. I mean, what's more normal than being on the top 40? I have a stepson who sometimes sends videos and then go down the rabbit hole to see who created them and who turns it on, far right and a far right influencer. And I think that's the point. The point is that right as we speak today, there are young people who are sitting in front of their computer or their phone, flicking through videos. And there's something inside of that young person that says, oh, that's an interesting idea. That fits with some of the things I believe. And they start to go down that rabbit hole and they get trapped and they get absorbed. You know, I've done it myself in not the same sort of way, but certainly in certain finding. We've all done it. We've found something and we sort of follow it along and we find more and more about it. And young people, young men in particular, you know, the people that follow Andrew Tate, for example, are people that are easily influenced. So thanks, Kubaran, for the money. I really do appreciate it. I really do. So thank you there as well. And also Mr. Beach, thank you as well. So I guess we need to find ways to combat that, to push back against it, because that is the problem. And how governments do that, I haven't got an answer to any of that. I don't know if you do either. So I'm going to finish with this particular article, which was in Sky News today, which I think highlights a point that we need to never, ever forget. So a former partner named after two killed in alleged domestic violence attacks in Sydney's northwest. So a man is accused, I'll just increase this in size. A man is accused of killing his former partner and a new boyfriend in Sydney's northwest, has been named as police continue to investigate what they allege was a domestic violence incident. So the person, 47, was charged with 2 counts of murder following the deaths of Anasina and her partner at a Quakers Hill home. Emergency services were called to their street shortly before 5 a.m. on Sunday after reports of disturbance. Now, the reason why it's important to raise this particular issue is that in Australia, between 82 and 95 women are killed each year. Now, I'm not going to say anything here that I want to minimise what happened on December the 14th. I'm not minimising it at all. I need you to understand that. But where is the same outrage against men who commit these horrible, horrible crimes, where they often kill not just the partner, but the children, and where men kill their partner and the children find themselves without a parent at all? Where is the outrage about every year over 80 women are killed? Now, these men don't belong to Islamic cell or neo-Nazis necessarily, or some right-wing group. They are just men who are violent and abusive because they don't get what they want. Where is the cry? Where is the those of us, apart from myself, who've been working in this space for decades? Where is the inquiry? Where is the Royal Commission into these deaths? Because these deaths just don't happen in one day. They happen spread out over a year. They happen by men, primarily. So when are we going to start looking at the way these men are radicalised to a point whereby we can deal with their version of radicalisation and how they deal with and manage their relationships? When is it going to be an outcry about that? 89. Now, I could say 89 to 90, whatever, deaths of women versus 15 on one day. One is anti-Semitic. The other is anti-women. And when are we going to make a stand against that? I guess that's my final word, and I do want to say to all of you, remember to subscribe to my channel, ring the bell for further notifications. There'll be more and more videos around all of these issues, unfortunately, as time goes by, because these issues are important, and it's my job to have a conversation with you about them. And look, I want to thank all of you who have launched into the conversation today. There's a lot of you. Thank you very much for that. I appreciate your involvement, and I just want to say that I hope that next year, I don't have all that much hope for it, but I'm hoping that next year is a far better year than this year. But I think at the end of the day, we all need to make it the best that we can. Take care.